more people coming in. They might end up having to sit in the front row. No, you got a chair. Okay. So welcome to the last event of this semester's Writers Project series. I'm Nancy White, Director of the Writers Project. And I'm very excited to have here today the collaborating team, Wendy Chin Tanner and Tyler Chin Tanner. They collaborate in art, in business, and in parenting, raising two great kids that I get to watch on Facebook. They are maybe two of the most famous children in America due to Wendy's hilarious post. So I'll give a little bio background about each one of them because they do a lot where they're not collaborating also. So just kind of give you the big picture, and then I'll turn it over to them. They will sort of alternate talking, and then at the end we'll have question and answer. So store up those good questions as we go along. Tyler, from his early careers in teaching and humanitarian aid work, took the leap into his lifelong passion for comics, attending the Kubert School. Did I pronounce that right? Yeah. From 2003 to 2006, and then co-founding A Wave Blue World, which I have to say slowly because otherwise you accidentally say A Brave New World, which I think it's deliberately a play on, right? With his wife Wendy in 2005. So in publishing through A Wave Blue World, Tyler wrote a number of graphic novels, including the New York Times featured American Terrorist, which I think we'll be touching on today, and edited several anthologies such as New York Times featured All We Ever Wanted, and art books like Punk Rock Jazz, and creator-owned projects including Kismet and Man of Fate. Is that two separate?
That's the same.
That's okay. Kismet, comma, Man of Fate. Okay, good. Wendy Chin Tanner is the co-publisher and executive director of A Wave Blue World, which she founded with her husband Tyler. She's the author of poetry collections, starting with Turn in 2014, which was a finalist for the Oregon Book Awards, and Anyone Will Tell You in 2019. Those were both from this wonderful newish press called Sibling Rivalry Press. And then she is a co-author of the New York Times featured graphic novel American Terrorist. She's also serving as the poetry editor at The Nervous Breakdown, which is one of my favorite titles of Poetry Journal. Trained sociologist who specializes in race, identity, and culture, she continues to write and teach on these topics, in addition to running workshops and guest lecturing at a variety of institutions. She was born and raised in New York City, which is how we got her back from the West Coast, and educated at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom, and is the proud mother of two amazing daughters and the proud daughter of two amazing immigrants who are parents of Wendy. I always wondered what that would be like, to be the parents of Wendy. So I'll turn the microphone over to you guys, and thank you for coming up. There's some chairs in the front if you want a better view and back support. Yes, be brave. Thank you, Brooke.
Thanks so much for coming out today, and thanks so much for having us. I wanted to just start with letting y'all know that I have known Nancy White since I was 12 years old. She was one of my first English teachers who set me on a path to writing and let me know that that was a viable career and is something that maybe I could do if I worked hard enough and was good enough at it. She made me feel like I was. And she is one of those magic teachers that as a teacher myself, I've used as a touchstone to hope to inspire the same kind of magic in my classroom. So thank you, Nancy, for your role in my life and for having me here today. It's a really lovely full circle. So as Nancy said, Tyler and I wear a bunch of hats. I'm a poet, sociologist, and a publisher, and Tyler is a graphic novelist, an artist, and an anthologist. And all of these things are just tools for telling stories. And each one of those tools has different characteristics and rules and conventions So we're here today to talk about that variety and how those tools can entwine with one another and to show you visually how that works. In 2005, which was also the year that we got married, we founded this company. So coming up is next year in 2020 is the 15th anniversary of Away Blue World and our 15th anniversary as the Chin Tanner family. And our motto at the company is making stories matter. So this comes from an idea in social science that words make worlds. And in the case of graphic novels, you could say that words and pictures make worlds. And what this means is we believe that art can and should comment on the world. Because the way we think about the world, the way we look at it, the way we talk about it, the way we imagine it, the stories that we tell about it shapes our concrete reality. So our books, both our books of poems and our graphic novels that we write, as well as those that we publish, are concerned with social issues and social justice. So how do we tell stories that matter? What are the strategies that we can use for keeping those weighty topics interesting and exciting and entertaining? And how do we make people feel? That's kind of what it boils down to. How do you make people feel? So I'm going to turn it over to Tyler first to show you some excerpts from American Terrorist and talk through some of these visual strategies and narrative strategies in the sequential art medium for telling those kinds of stories that make words and pictures matter.
Hello. All right, we're going to start with some comics. This is the book that I'm talking about, American Terrorist. It was my second graphic novel. It came out originally in 2011. Looked like this. But I'm excited to get to talk about it because we are doing a new edition of it next year, 2020. It comes out in October, which just happens to be a rather political season, October, November 2020. That edition, I'm excited because it'll be in full color, and you'll get to see some of the full color pages as I get to that. This was originally done in black and white, which that's one of the things with comics is you do have some black and white, you do have some color ones. And this, when we approached this, as I said, it was 2011, but it's been amazing how prescient it's remained and how relevant. It seems as if we're still talking about the same topics. We'll see when we get to it. But comics have always had a tradition of being involved in politics and social structure. They first came about during World War II. Captain America famously punching Nazi, or actually Hitler, in his first issue. And there was a lot of that. But when I got to this in 2011, obviously the world was different in some ways, same in some of the ways, but different. So my strategy was like, how can we deal with these topics in the new age of comics? And in this case, there's no superheroes. Not that that's not still a big thing, but I wanted to use, your typical American, real world type heroes in this adventure. So using the medium to tell these kind of stories that comics have been known for, but in a new way. I'm going to begin with the cover. You can see this cover right here. One of the things in comics, the covers can be either representational of the inside. You can get an exciting image that's like very much like something you would see in the inside, like a splash page image, or you can do something that's more abstract in the sense, like you'll see this isn't actually what the background looks like or what happens, but it's meant to sort of invoke a feeling of the issue in more of a representational way. So there's this cover, and then two of the other covers along the way. Again, same sort of thing. I tried to play around with the visuals to do something interesting. We've got topic of pollution, and then you actually have a scene from the interior within that. And then the other one, which was a lot of fun to do, I did this with some charcoal pencil. The smokestacks, again, another form of pollution, and putting the skull within the smoke that we used there. That was a fun image to create. So those are the covers. Now I'm going to go into the interiors and comic telling and different methods that we use in telling the stories. This is the opening scene in the book. It features some form of domestic terrorism in here. They're a group is running in to burn down a new development in the area. Now, when we set up this scene, you can see this one has several panels per page, and when you're telling with a comic book, you decide how many panels you want to tell the story in, and here we're building up to something, so we have panel to panel to panel, and then this leads into a page turn, and then we have a splash page. And that's often one thing that when you're building up tension, you go panel to panel. You have some pages with several panels in it, leading up to the use of the full page, which I did here, which makes for some pretty arresting visuals. Moving along through the story, these are the color pages. Same sort of idea here. We have some interior panels, number of panels along the way, and then when we get to a page like this, we open it up, you see we go from interior to exterior. The borderless panels on the edge, they go to all the way to the sides of the pages to help slow you down, get a different sense of pacing. Moving along, here is some panel breaks. When you want to show some more exciting action and things start to get a little bit more chaotic and you're featuring things, here we have someone destroying her lab, and rather than the traditional panel layout, you've got one panel and then you've got two small ones. You see her reaching for the chemicals there, destroying her computer and her research. Same thing with the other one. Things get a little bit chaotic, the mayhem starts, the panels sort of represent that, where it's like not as clean and clear. All of a sudden things get a little bit, you're not even sure which order to read them in. That's one way that you can sort of build a tension with your readers and have them anticipate some more action coming up. The other thing I wanted to point out with that second page there is the use of color. Since this is the color edition, you can see the third panel there near the top, the big one, the background color. That's not, actually what the background looks like, but the color is used there not to actually show the surroundings, but to create the emotion, the emotional impact. And you have this sort of explosion kind of behind her. Nothing's blown up yet, but that's getting the reader in the mood. Here's something that I tried to do with this comic book, which I felt was somewhat unique at the time, is try to put some technology into the book itself. You can see we have a website here. The family is reading on their computer, and I show the website that they're looking at, and then even I push that even more on the next page, where you'll see the screen sort of within the page being used like a panel, and then you have all these comments. The comment section that's become a bigger part of our life is reading conversations through text, through comments, through forums, things like that. And that's another thing it's funny that I created this in 2011, and the actual shape of some of these things may be a little bit different, but I mean, this is still pretty much the world we live in, looking at websites and things on our devices and reading comments and communicating in this fashion. So, it's pretty great that I feel as if this still holds up in terms of a book that I'll have coming out next year as well. But yeah, that's one of the great things I think about comic books, because it's a combination of images and words, that this actually made for a good method of using technology representation in our story. Because unlike a movie or something where this would have to keep moving, you can actually sit there and oh, okay, let me look at this website much like we do on a screen, or read through the messages just like how we read them. So that's a good use of the comic medium as opposed to film or TV or something like that, because you can stop, look at an image, read the words that coincide with it. So something that I tried to do for this series. Let's see, moving on. Now we can move up into the action where things are going a little bit faster. And this is probably what we're more used to with comic books. We've got the a lot of action. We get the sound effects, the blam, the cracks, the ta-ta-ta-ta. This is a little bit where I felt like the story opened up and be like, okay, this is the action that people are used to with the comics. We have a very open panel again, like what I talked about, where this the top image goes to the edges of the panels and then of the page, and then you also have panels within panel borders. You can play around with that as you're developing the action. And then the second page, I thought that was a good cross-cut. Sometimes you have the same characters meeting together in a panel, but in this it's going back and forth from, you see one character, then the other character as he's escaping on the snowmobile, and then back to one face and back to the next. And then back, you're actually like, if it were a film, it'd be camera going back and forth rather than containing all in one scene. And that actually builds tension too, and you do a little foreshadowing that you know that these characters you're building towards an eventual confrontation between the two of them. Then finally I'm going to end, before I do my reading, actually with a double page spread. This is actually 2 pages of the book. Now I did put some panels in it, so you have 2 panels on the one page and 2 panels on the other. But this is another thing you can use comics for. If you have the room to really open things up, this comes at the end of the story. And I really wanted to show the crowd gathering and the protests and everything in the street. So opened up the art, filled up 2 full pages to really show the scene. And this is what's called an establishing shot, where you can let the reader know exactly where this is happening, who's there, where they are in relationship to each other. All right. Now, since I've gone through a lot of the story, what I wanted to do was finish with reading an excerpt of the story. I'm going to read along here since I can't see the screen as well. Just to get a sense of the story, this is a scene with our main characters on the run, and they've decided that they're going to go around the country and try to put in their protests in action, use technology, tell their story of the world. So we open up inside the room. These are characters that we don't know before. We've got a man in his house with a guest. And so she says, "Oh, your house is so lovely. And you're sure your wife won't be back tonight?" Mm-hmm. She's taking the kids out to our beach house for the weekend. We're all alone. And, "Honey, I'm home." "What? Gotcha." We're, sorry, I can't quite point here. "Gotcha. Seriously, though, if you're going to trust your staff with a set of keys, you really ought to pay them better. Who are you? What are you planning on making us do?" "I'm not sure I like where you're going with that. There are other uses for handheld camcorders, you know. Don't you recognize any of these people? It was your bank that gave all of them mortgages they couldn't afford. And since you also foreclosed on their homes, well, we figured we could stay here till they get back on their feet. Could make for a really great reality TV show, and the mistress thing's a total bonus. Contributing to the financial crisis and philandering. And you said this was a bad idea." Then we got the sound effects. I don't know what I'm pointing to on my book. You can see the sound effect over there. "Ha, you didn't think you could bring all these people into this neighborhood without someone calling the police, did you? I'll save my 'I told you so' dance until after we get out of here. You guys go. I'll distract them and meet you at the rendezvous." Next page. Outside. "Okay, people, party's over. Keep it moving. Hey, I recognize that guy. It's that terrorist from the internet. Let's go get him. The police came. They're after Owen. Please, Stags, you've got to go back for him. Get them the hell out of here. It's a good thing I came prepared for this situation." Then we're back to the other page he's running through. "There he is. Stop where you are. He's got a gun. Everyone down." And then we got some action and some great colors there. They speed by. He's in the car down. I don't know if you can see the bottom. They're hiding in the car down there. "So long, officers." And then we move on to the next scene. That one was a little too close for comfort, Owen. Maybe it's time to think about laying low for a while. Don't know what you're talking about. That plan worked like a charm. Uh-oh. Stop. What is it? Wait here. I'll be right back. I don't know if it's quite big enough to see. He's walking into the pharmacy. There's a line at the counter there. "Everybody freeze. This is a stick-up. I always wanted to say that. You, in the coat, refill this now, and throw in some extra chambers while you're at it. Well, since I'm here anyway, he gets up, he's on his phone. Hi, Hannah, it's me. Yeah, I'm fine. Listen, what's the name of that medication you've been trying to get? Wait, what is it? Hold on. He hands the phone to the pharmacist. I think you better talk to her. Hello? Yes, I know the one you mean. You're in luck. We have it in stock. And then you can see Owen looking at the lady who's next in line. And then you can't quite see the cash register. It says $421.57. Here you are, ma'am. No charge today. He hands her all the medicine. He looks at the orders that need to be filled. As a matter of fact, who's next? Finally, universal health care for everyone. And he hands out the medication. So just a little political commentary there. Everything from the banker who got bailed out and was handing out bad mortgages to a little take on the universal health care and drug prices, which is, again, still a relevant topic today. I don't think that, there wasn't anything here where this point of the story was to tell you exactly how things should be or what the answer is, but they addressed the topic, seeing how it affects people's lives today, and just sort of opening up the question to the readers of what's the best way to handle this and address the issue. So, yeah, that was the story. You want me to move on to your cover? And I think we'll make the easy transition from comics to poetry.
Okay, so as we've seen in sequential art, one of the things that we do is we move the eye from panel to panel, and we move the eye across the page and up and down the page, and there are all kinds of things that we can do in that regard. And I think after 15 years of being exposed to the sequential art medium in graphic novels, that has bled into my poetry, and I've begun to think in those terms too about use of the entire page. And I'm sure you've all learned that drama is created by tension, right? So we usually have tension. When we think of tension, we usually think of tension in terms of tension within the story itself, tension between characters, tension in the build-up towards a climax. But there are other ways to create tension when you're making a story. You can create tension between different elements of your storytelling, between different parts of the page, between image and text, between silence and speech, silence and words. You can have tension between different panels. I mean, all kinds of things you can do in that way to create drama in different ways. So moving on to the poetry section. This is my second book, Anyone Will Tell You, and it came out recently in March. And in this book, there are a lot of what's called concrete poems, which are poems that have a very strong visual element. I developed a new form in this book that I call 3x3s, or trisyllabic tercets, and they consist of poems that are 3 lines per stanza and 3 syllables per line. And that was a form that was actually developed during the first year of my second daughter's life. She was a marsupial baby, and what I mean by that is that I had to carry this kid in a baby carrier, like for hours and hours a day to keep her asleep. So I would just be pacing the halls of my house with her in the baby carrier, and the only thing I had on me was my iPhone. And I wrote the vast majority of the poems in this book on my iPhone Notes app. And I don't know if you've tried to write anything on your iPhone Notes app with one hand, but it's really hard to do capitalizations. It's really hard to do punctuation. And so after a while, I just stopped doing them. And that really lent itself to this form, which has no punctuation, no capitalizations, very short lines, and a rhythm to it that kind of mimics the rhythm of that kind of bounce walking that all moms do. And it flows, each line flows into the next and can be read in a multitude of different ways. And much like with sequential art, that is a way that we can move the eye and move the reader across the page in different ways. I wanted to start with this poem called Index, which is a really tough poem, as a way of kind of introducing the idea of drama and tension, not just when we have exciting splash pages and stuff like that, but we can also have drama and tension just with a smattering of words on the page. Index. Once I had long black hair. I confess that it was beautiful. Wait, this is a poem. Once I had beautiful long hair and a baby. I confess I hungered. Wait, this is a poem about how once I had a baby and I was still hungry. I confess I wanted another. I confess I wanted 2 babies. Wait, I should say how I tried to have another and it died. I confess I tried for another after that. I confess it died too in me. I confess 2 babies died inside me. Wait, let me tell you. Once I cut my long black hair. I confess that it was beautiful. So there is a way in this poem of spacing the column of words in the 3rd stanza to the right of the page that creates a kind of tension too in the way in which it interrupts itself. So the speaker of the poem is interrupting herself, and the text of the poem is interrupting the text of the poem itself. So it's this very kind of inward-looking structure, not just in the narrative of the poem, but in the structure of the poem. Okay. So here's another poem that is a highly concrete poem. So just backtracking again, Index seems like a very personal poem, but as we know from the second wave feminist movement, the personal is political. So that is also, very much of a social issue. We tend not to talk about miscarriage. We tend not to talk about birth and women's bodies and women's reproduction. So that is a social issue that we're dealing with in a public forum. This poem, Velity, deals with social issues in a different way. I was inspired to write this poem during a trip on the Pacific Northwest to the coastline, where I witnessed this really incredible phenomenon where thousands and thousands and thousands of these jellyfish, these purple jellyfish called Velella, were beached up and down the shore from, I think, Oregon all the way down to California. And this is a natural phenomenon that happens every few years, but it had been happening much, much more. And somebody that I met on the beach that day said that they thought that it was something to do with Fukushima, and there had actually been reports that they were getting things washed up from Japan, and they were testing the water, and they were finding radiation in the water even in Oregon. So I couldn't help but think, at that time it was the apex of the Syrian refugee crisis, and I couldn't help but think about the relationship between human beings and the ocean, and pollution, of course, but also human beings and immigration via the ocean. And the Pacific Ocean was, of course, the conduit for my family to immigrate to the United States. So this poem, Velity, was born from that. And as you can probably see, the visual aspects of the poem mimic the way in which the Velella looked beached across the shore. Velity, which means wish or desire. Because life began in the sea, death seems natural. On the beach, the waves call the names of the dead. Velella, by the wind sailors. Sea rafts, blue sails beached by the billions. A bright blue whale exploded fractally. The fault of nobody, not you or me or the inscrutable Pacific. This is what happens when you are born with a sail set in one direction. See, the sea connects the continents by water, salty as red. And those soft bodies seep venom onto skin if touched. for nothing is innocent, not tangled seaweeds named green rope or wireweed or bladderwrack or hiding in the blades trapping prey. Pray, do you believe in prayer there in books, in genetic epistemology, scraping my inner cheeks, bloodletting? I'm testing, 1, 2, 3. Is this poem a poem about me or the sea? You see how I always place myself back at the center. I myself am the center, myself the middle kingdom of this poem. I must insist. Queen of the jellyfish. So these two poems are not actually next to one another in the book, but they are companion pieces in some ways. They're both Me Too poems. The first is written in a much more standard way in terms of the trisyllabic tercets or 3x3 structure, and so I wanted to place it next to the poem that's also a Me Too poem, which is written in a more kind of disruptive or deconstructed way visually, just to give you that contrast. So the first one is called Who's Afraid, which is a Me Too poem that is really about abuse within families and how there are all kinds of structures within families for silencing that abuse. Who's afraid? Who is the wolf at the table who pretends there is no wolf, who's afraid of the wolf who eats at the table? And the next poem, How It Is Written, is about whistleblowers. And, much like American Terrorist, I think in some ways it was prescient because I wrote it before the trial, but, I would like to, if I could, I would like to dedicate this poem to Dr. Blasi. I'm blanking on the second part of the hyphenation of her last name in the Kavanaugh trial. You too? Okay.
Me too.
Yes. Okay. So How It Is Written. The cuckoo in the nest has got a big mouth, a beehive like a buzz in the body of the things left unsaid. Say it. This is how it is written. So this poem, When Sleepless, is somewhat of a love poem. But here is an example of the way in which the visual structure of the poem can give us a contrast to the subject of the poem. So it's a love poem, but at the same time, the two parts of the poem are splitting apart. So as an indication, perhaps, of the way in which couples are together and yet separate people. When Sleepless. Injunction. First throb of fall. Pines, last berries, sweet breath of green trees breathing. Indigo shadows fade to gray by decrements. Can you hear me when I don't speak? When sleepless, wind shredded clouds show us streaks of starlit sky. Cirrus, rending drenched, restless edge, rustles, creaks, rushing. You close your eyes unhearing. Sigh of night, ground swallows, dark rising. So the second to last poem that I'm going to read is the last poem from this book, Anyone Will Tell You. This is the title poem. And again, we have the 3x3 structure, but it is heavily disrupted. So this poem is, I think, about this transition of life where you start getting called sir or ma'am, and you I think when you're a child, you think that you become an adult and then that's it, you know, you grow up and that's it. But there are many, many stages within adulthood, and so this is about the transition into kind of mid-adulthood at a phase in life where, you know, people think you have all the answers, and that's where the phrase "anyone will tell you" kind of comes from. This idea of like, well, you know, you should know it all by this point, and you're being asked advice, and you're also being given all kinds of advice. Anyone will tell you. Nearly night, the sky bleached to winter, white over black water, soft of wind from box fans speaking tongues to the heat of bodies, of beds and rooms rising. Twice the moon rose this month, twice I spoke platitudes on time and the color blue. Outside, the vault of sky, dark blue, violet, blushed, bruised, violent. There's never only one. Anyone will tell you. Skin of dust on liquid, dusk-covered I fall. And fallen thus after fall, it will be the middle of my life. One of those days, become one of these. And the last poem I'm going to read is from my first book, A Turn, which has just a few concrete poems, but I wanted to read this one to you, Botany, which is a poem in a diptych of poems inspired by Ovid's Metamorphoses, the lovers in Ovid's Metamorphoses. The first poem is about young lovers, and this poem is about old lovers. So this is from the Baucis and Philemon myth. And in that myth, Zeus comes to, the king of the gods, comes to this elderly couple's house, Baucis and Philemon's house, and he is in disguise and he asks for hospitality, and they give it. And as a gift, he grants them a wish, and because they are so in love, they ask to be together forever. And so he grants their wish by transforming them upon their death into a linden and an oak tree, so that they can be entwined together for eternity. So this poem, Botany, was inspired by that myth, and it's kind of, you know, the wish of a young couple for what they may become. And of course, I think it's pretty obvious that the concrete visual nature of the poem is that it is constructed in such a way as to indicate the narrative of the poem. It looks like a tree, it looks like tree roots. Botany. These saplings we have bedded side by side, that winnow unseeing roots through the exhaling loam, that drink with pale reaching tendrils from well springs wending, whirling crystalline underground, grow out from their cringing pods and uncurl their coiled heads, stretching arms and fingers untwining the linden from the oak, to straighten together, I think, towards the same naked light. All right, so there are clearly a lot of shared concerns between the two media that we've covered today, poetry and graphic novels. Shared concerns with distillation, the use of silence, the relationship between different parts on the page, between text and white space. And I think something that I bring to the collaborations between Tyler and myself is, you know, that sort of poet's eye to less is more, less words. And so, you know, we've discussed the relationships today between different elements and modalities of storytelling, and poetry obviously works much more with sight and sound, but we can also bring in these kinds of visual elements. And graphic novels work more with image and text, but you know, I think that something that working in both mediums has brought for us is an opening up of the possibilities of each of those media. And you know, much like, I like to think a lot about how musical scores work in films, for example. Like, I think Quentin Tarantino, it makes great use of musical scores. And why does he do that? He has a tendency to use music that clashes with the scene. You know, I'm thinking in particular of, have you guys seen Reservoir Dogs? Yes? So you know that scene, that famous scene where Michael Madsen is about to cut the ear off of some guy, like, and he's strapped to a chair. And what music comes on during that torture scene? It's Stuck in the Middle with You. It's like an incredibly sort of like jaunty 1960s tune. This, and that kind of disjuncture, that kind of unexpected clash brings you a different layer, a different level of narrative and tension and storytelling. So that's what we try to bring to both our graphic novels and our books of poems. So as publishers and creators, it's very important to us not just to represent diversity, and not just to represent diversity in the stories that we're telling, but also to pass the mic. So we're dedicated to creating as many opportunities as possible, creating a platform for a multiplicity of voices. The bottom line to making stories matter is to make people identify with your characters, and to make people identify with your voice, and to make people feel. Do you want to add something?
I think you're gonna do
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're very happy to answer any questions that may come up about either media or about how to get into graphic novels and comics or publishing or anything like that.
Dun, da, da.
I'm an aspiring graphic novelist, but I have zero artistic ability.
Yeah.
As the writer in sort of a collaborative process, what are things I need to keep in mind or be mindful of for the artist when I'm trying to translate that over?
Right, yeah, well, I went to art school even though I mostly do the writing and publishing, so it's good to really understand the medium. And you can do that mostly through reading it, but also understanding how the story is told. So you may be writing with words and creating the story of what happens, what's said, but that's going to have to be displayed through artwork. So you really want to study how the story is told through these images, through the panels. You're not just writing something that anybody could read through the words. So even if you're not making the decisions of the art yourself, and that's going to the artist, you need to know, all right, how is this story being told? The different beats that it's being told in. This would be the one panel, this should be in the other. What goes into a panel? You can only have one action at a time. It's a very static image, and that's complemented by the next image. But make sure you're only telling one of those actions at a time. So yeah, it is very important to study and be aware of what goes into the artwork of telling the story, so that when you write yours, you know what you're delivering to the artist. So your script, the comic graphic novel script, is very much a conversation with the artist, which is why it's good to actually know the artist, or at least have conversations with them, so that when you're writing the script, you feel like you know this person that you're giving these instructions to. So it's a collaborative process, and you should both be aware of how the story is going to be told. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it doesn't hurt to, when you're writing the script, to do some thumbnails too. It can just be stick figures, or just so that you understand, okay, this is the first action, this is what happens after that. This should be a small panel, this should be a bigger one, establishing shot or splash page.
The graphic novel script also is probably more similar to a film script or a TV script than it is to like a short story or anything like that. And I think, speaking as a writer who has worked with artists, there's an element of surrender too, because like they're gonna take your words and your vision and filter it through their own. So it really is very much of a close working relationship and a conversation. And I think that's why writer and artist teams will like stick together. If it goes well, they'll stick together for book after book after book, because it's hard to build that relationship.
Seems like a very intimate process.
Yeah, it's very intimate. Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of conflict. So, FYI.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
ask, does it make it easier to be married and collaborating or harder?
Oh,
Well, I mean, luckily we don't do the writer artist
Yeah.
so much. Yeah, we have our own sort of collaboration. I think everybody just has to work out their process. I don't actually know too many married people that's one's the writer, one's the artist. More often you get like one's the business person, one's the creator. Yeah, that process, I think it's good to know each other when you're talking writer and artist. It's good to know each other and be very familiar, possibly even friends. But I would think some distance might help too, so you don't feel like the one person is right over your shoulder.
yeah, or like you did this panel really shittily because we had that fight about the laundry, you know, like that's.
Gave my character a wart. Yeah.
Right, but I mean, in terms of, to answer your question, Nancy, in terms of, how does our creative collaboration coexist with our sort of personal life? I mean, we started writing together, the same year that we became parents, and actually, yeah, I mean, you would think that that would be crazy, but actually I found that, that gave us something to focus on that wasn't just parenting and wasn't just, what was it, you know, diapers and sleeplessness, you know, it was like this other space that we could have, and, you know, for us, I think it's been like intimacy building, and also because we have to be really, really brutally honest with each other. You know, I think when you're collaborating on something that you both really care about, you want it to be as good as possible, so you can't just be like, oh, that's great, honey, because, you know, if it's not really great, that's your name on it too, right? So, building that language to be honest while at the same time being constructive and kind and generative, that's also a real skill.
You guys got a favorite comics when you were a kid? Kids?
Your comics when I was a kid? Oh, yeah, I started mostly off with the superhero stuff and eventually moved to more independent things. I was.
Elf Quest, he was
I did-
really
I did-
into Elf
I
Quest.
did get into Elf Quest pretty early. That was a good one, yeah. Did you have one?
Did I have a favorite comic? I mean, I loved Wonder Woman. I was, you know, I gravitated towards all of the books that had strong female leads. So I loved Wonder Woman. I loved, you know, what was that one with like the sort of a pseudo superhero, but she was like on roller skates.
Oh, Dazzler?
The Dazzler. Yeah, I mean we're showing our age right. I'm showing my age right now, but yeah. So absolutely the ones about women. I liked Conan too. Weirdly, I have weird taste.
So I've got two questions. So the first one is, I always have trouble with graphic novels because I don't know what to look at first. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to look at the pictures first and then go back and read it, or if I'm supposed to go look at the picture and the word, or am I supposed to read it first and think, oh, you know, like that constantly having to make a decision every page is always a little disturbing. So I just wondered if you had some thoughts about that. You know, like how do you read graphic novels? Or
Yeah,
what
it's
do you
definitely something that takes some getting used to. And I think as a creator, from all levels, writers, artists, even the letterer who puts it in, that's something to keep in mind, because you really do want to lead the eye. And the general principle for reading comics is really just like reading anything, at least in this hemisphere, is the top to bottom, left to right, top to bottom. So if there's a panel structure, I'll see if I can move back to one, go back through the poems. You do, what, let's go to one that has, I mean, you do often get hit by everything all at once when you turn the page. And so maybe you can take a moment to sort of orientate yourself by looking at the whole thing, whether it's one page or both pages. But the idea is just, I mean, you sort of start with this panel, you know, and then this word balloon is here first, and this would sort of lead you into this character, and then up to this one. So, you know, I understand how it's a little difficult to get into at first, but I don't know, you sort of take one bit at a time, you know, break it down, you got one panel, one word balloon, read through those, then this one goes into this one, and then you just go right back down a tier, left to right again, down a tier, left to right. This is a more straightforward pattern. Then there are ones, like I said, once you get people that are a little bit more familiar, then you can get into things that aren't as clear. You know, you get two panels, then you get the wide panel, or I had some ones that, I think for the most part, we tried to keep our panel structure pretty straightforward. Either a wide panel, you've got these different tiers. That makes it easier. When you have too many panels, especially from the beginning, that break up that pattern. Like when I start doing interesting things like, yeah, these where it's not quite as clear. Here you have lots of different panel structures. I mean, that's actually to set the mood and disorientate the reader a little bit, but I can understand that if you're only just getting into comics, that might be hard if that's like page 1 or page 2. So I think a good method, what I would actually tell creators is sort of stick to a more straightforward structure starting into it before you start doing things that are more interesting like this, or like what I did here, where it's like really testing your ability to read what order, yeah.
And the other question I have is, you know, okay, so it's not a book because it's got pictures, and it's not a verbal book. And it's not a movie because it's still.
Yeah.
So what is something that a graphic novel can do that a movie can't do? Like, why would you use it? I mean, obviously it's cheaper to make than a movie, but I mean, why would you, what kinds of materials might lend themselves better to, you know, this form than a movie or than the written word?
Yeah, well, it is a visual medium, but the advantage is that you don't have to keep things moving. There's only so much you can do in a movie to pause on something. And actually, one of the reasons why there's been a lot of like action genres in things like comics is because you can actually freeze on a moment and show it in great detail. When you actually have action in the movies, it actually needs to be done quickly, and sometimes you don't even put it into focus because that you often have a lot of things going on, the dark lighting to set the mood. So there really can be a chance in comics to really combine the experience of reading a book where you're not in a hurry, or you can read something more than once to really like, well, this is something that I really want to show you, both on a visual and a verbal level, that we can take our time with. And that's why I try to do some interesting things like this, where it's like, oh, you can really just sit there and take the time reading the different parts of it.
So there's more choice and autonomy for the reader.
Yeah.
You know, it's a more collaborative experience in that sense, I think.
Yeah, in some ways, like a movie has to be almost like a roller coaster ride. And if you slow down too much, you kind of lose your audience, where you don't have that in a graphic novel.
And that's dictated, you know, the experience when you're watching a film or watching another form of televised media, or even when you're listening to music, there's more authorial choice in that sense. It's more dictated to the person who's receiving it. Whereas I think there's more flow back and forth in this heavily hybridized medium. You know, I think part of it I can identify with the kind of dissonance that you're saying that you experience sometimes with graphic novels as someone who read comics as a child and then put them down for many years and came back to them as an adult. There was a kind of literacy, a kind of facility with being able to take it in that I had to build up again. And I think of it almost as like learning how to appreciate jazz, you know, because there's so much happening all at once. And you have to sort of like build up an ability to pick out the different parts and to make meaning out of them and to like almost slow it down for yourself. But unlike with jazz, you can slow it down for yourself, you know, and you can get different, I find that when I reread a book, I get different things out of it on the second or third reading that I missed initially. Yes?
So one of the things I've always loved about graphic novels, I was a Tintin fan, you know, total Euro geek thing, whatever the label would be for that as a kid. But when it's almost like the camera angle, when the artist's point of view really changes, and you had some of this, you know, when you suddenly have a long shot after being in a close
Yeah.
interior. And do you feel that in writing? You know, does that feeling of changing point of view, all of a sudden mid piece of art, come up in other ways? I was just thinking about that when you were showing your images. Either when you're writing the language, are you already thinking about things like that? When you're working on a graphic novel, or even in poetry, do you see that? Places where you do that, where you radically change the point of view
Oh, where
right
you
in the
pivot.
middle.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think I in particular do that a lot because I am really interested in oppositions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, you can render that interest in a number of different ways. So, you know, anyone will tell you in particular, you know, I'm interested in oppositions between self and other, human beings and the planet, the earth and the cosmos, gender and race, you know, those sorts of oppositions, and that is, of course, rendered in the content itself, but you can also do that with tone, right? A complete reversal in tone, or an interruption of an interruption of the speaker to itself, or, you know, there's such a variety of ways you can do that, or you can do that visually by dropping a line to the other side of the page, you know. Can you give an example of what you meant by the panels doing that in graphic novels?
Well, even here, we're inside the room, and then the very next panel, we're outside looking in.
Yeah.
And then in the very next panel, we're in a town square.
Right.
Boom,
Well,
boom,
I think
boom.
that's an example of something that you can do in a graphic novel that you cannot do in a film or in a television show, right? Like, you can have these sorts of jump cuts and simultaneous POVs,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and one thing about panels, and the gutters in between them is there's a variety of things that can happen in between from panel to panel. I think in the earlier days of comics, there used to be it was almost each panel was its own scene, and the reader expected to just move it off and out, like a Superman comic where one panel he's in the Daily Planet talking to the people that work there, and in the next panel he'd already be flying off to the next thing. Whereas this day and age, I think maybe because of film, where we're used to transitioning things a little bit better, where you have to show the panel of him walking out the door, and then changing, so it's like you get it in the reader's mind that, okay, we're moving from place to place. But there still is a good amount of room to go from exterior to interior, and change. If you have got different characters, sometimes you just show it from sort of an omniscient point of view, and sometimes you'll actually be seeing it from their point of view. And I think the more people are used to comics and reading it, the more they're accepting and sort of going from one perspective to the other. But it is something you think about when you're writing it, like how can I make this both easy enough for the reader to follow along, but also use these tools to really set the mood and get them feeling connected to what's going on.
But also, like, who is the audience? Like, who's the market for that particular book, too? I think that matters, because, I think different audiences have different appetites and different aptitudes for pace. Our older daughter, who's 12, she watches a lot of anime, and I find it so frenetic and so fast-paced, I can't follow what's going on, but for her, she watches it all the time. So she has a really different appetite for speed, essentially, and we've gotten used to that to some degree, and so it makes a difference as to calibrating the pace and the look of the thing to the audience to whom it's pitched. So a YA book is going to look really different from like a memoir type book, and a memoir type book is going to look really different from a political thriller, and things like pacing become just another tool in that kit.
Other questions? Anyone? All right, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Wendy has brought some books with check out, books of poems, and of course you can go up and ask a question one-on-one as well.
Yes, yes. There is a class that you take that's specifically that way. But it's the majority of it is drawing, like they have a specific course that you go through, so they take these classes, most of them is drawing.
That was my next question. Yeah, they usually.
But again, I don't know if you.
Oh, my own.
Not your schoolwork.
Well, I know that they
Oh,
Right,
okay.
right, so you can go to that program, so it's an art school.
Jot it down.
Yeah, so in terms of like, you know, I mean, would you be interested in going to an art school focus on writing? That's essentially what I'm interested in. I went through the program, and I learned so much about comics, making, even from a writing perspective, you know,
Usually on that,
stuff is really helpful.
I don't think staring at it is just for the
I think I did it when I got back.
Yeah. The other ones were on there and it was so crowded.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, someone who publishes, writes and publishes.
I know, I do. Right?
I've been planning on trying to get like into certain major
For learning to draw?
I'm very basic.
Well,
Very rudimentary. Like photograph novels for like
yeah, I mean, it's a long
I figured I would have to start at the bottom.
process. Yeah, you know, always figure out things, you can even get a book, I'll figure it out first, just so you can
Feels funky, but how are you doing? I
You look in like DC Comics has like basic.
Yeah, but what name was on fire?
I mean, that kind of stuff is really helpful for you, just to get a sense of, okay, these are the kind of. Just, I mean, are you willing to commit 5, 6 days a week of drawing?
Sure.
That's the only way, it takes so much time just to do this, over and over, day after day. That's kind of where I had to decide, like, okay, I haven't completely removed myself
One of
from
you is probably teaching.
side of things, but just full-time writers, I'm not gonna really
How are you? What are you up to?
I could, but that would be such a huge part of my day that I would have to find a way to get that done. So, I'm just having to decide, all right, is this something that I want to, because if you're just starting now, I mean, are you prepared to put in, do you want to go that direction, or do you stick to the writing side of things, which is still good to learn.
That's more
Yeah.
lines of what I'm saying too. I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specific pieces or like different projects that I'm working on.
Yeah.
And I want to have more insight into how to direct the artist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's.
And as far as actually drawing it, though, I don't have any.
Right, okay, so then I would focus more on those, like, how to draw, you know, the Marvel way. Look, because that would really give you nuts and bolts of how to draw. You sort of follow along with it, but if you're not trying to, get your all the way up.
Yes.
You don't have to go through the same sort of anatomy. Necessary. Yeah. Yeah, that's such a
Years ago, I
So, yeah, it looks like that. And
And
just study, like try to
So,
like pick up a graphic
had
novel
such
or
a-
comic, not just to
a kind
read,
of an annoyingly
but to really
arcane style.
Yeah,
doing.
that's
Yeah.
it.
That,
I do that with
Art
lots of
gallery.
favorites.
Yeah, yeah, but I got discouraged as I started writing, but as I was listening, maybe I should switch
Yeah.
away from so you
Yeah,
keep
well, you can
reading
watch the scripts online too, and just, okay, read what the actual script is saying, what are they, in the comic, you get the pictures and the dialogue, you don't get to see just what did the writer actually
It's
really
usually like it looks like movies.
Yeah,
I just,
it looks,
books I never get.
yeah, it looks a lot like a movie script, plus, you're, in a comic strip, you actually get the chance to actually talk directly to the artist, whereas a movie script would be like the director and set and everything like that. Here, you actually know it's pretty much just one person, maybe a couple people, so you can actually like almost talk to them. Here, here's what sounds good here, if you wanna try something like that. It can almost be like a little conversation, letter, yeah, so.
And it very more
yeah,
sense to
all those things.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Thank you very much.
There we go, yeah. Yeah, so she found that and.
Yeah.
Did you know that she's getting an operation on Monday? She happened as a publicist. Okay.
We did a book first last year, so that's why I knew her. Since the gallery it's just really bad in terms of.
So is emotional prepared to prepare meals?
First of its kind, so astrology.
Do you think you'll win some
Meals and body. Women we're doing sequential art renders with women. So
Well,
that's gonna be
I
a trip.
forgot
If we can put together these relationships to collaborate
And,
and see if we can earn the
okay, what
cats.
about
Yeah.
Get it in
dairy?
time.
For 2030.
So any
Do you
of
find that you have to lie to the,
Either later next week or the week after.
Yeah.
should I lie?
Not so much lies, this create a serene and stately life for me. But I know, actually, there's 3 months in there.
So your buffer is usually about 3 months?
Yeah, but it's poetry where.
Who's going to vacuum you?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Like 4 to 8 page story.
Yeah, yeah. Create a buffer.
Create a buffer.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I will
yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes.
What?
Yeah.
I already own all of her work, so I
Do
won't
you
be
take
buying
credit
it.
cards?
Yes.
Oh, good, because I ran out of money.
She's young enough to take credit cards.
Yes, I have an app for that.
I have an app for that too, and I never remember the right gizmo.
Bring the right.
Bring the gizmo, yeah.
Pretty soon we'll just be wafting our credit cards over the phone. We
Yeah.
won't need the gizmo.
Is that the poetry?
Yes.
That's what I want.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so anyone will tell you which is the latest book?
Sure.
Yes, that's what the majority of
Okay.
I read.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I apologize for slinking in late. Yeah. Thank you.
You know how I should, project this?
Yeah, I think
Well,
we're friends
just
at
pull
Facebook
it out,
too.
but-
Yes, I recognize you.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Kathleen McCoy.
Kathleen McCoy, keep track.
Right
Yes,
click on
yes, yes. Okay, yes. Yes, okay. I'm gonna turn on the.
Check, okay, there you go.
This is Nancy's networking after the
That's
network.
work.
I just keep liking everybody she knows.
That was so interesting.
This was
I really
fascinating.
enjoyed thinking about the back and forth between the poetic page and the graphic page.
Oh, good.
The idea about rhythm, the idea about tension and space, and fun to see the difference sort of visually.
Yeah.
Even though I understood the tensions in the same way.
Yeah.
That was neat.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, we're always trying to push our hair back. Or at least I.
Credit
So can you think of a,
Was it a credit card?
Yeah.
example of
Gift
poetic
cards.
sensibility, like made you change something on the page?
It mostly just gets me to cut down on the words or even the explanation.
Oh, the numbers on hole punch, that's fun.
Like, I don't have to explain to the reader
This is a
exactly what's
slinky.
going on. I should mostly be just getting them
That's one
in the
slinky.
right,
Well, it says slinkies.
give them the right feeling, the right mood, and everything like that, rather than very tight back narrative.
Well, we both
Brush it.
need both
That's gonna grow.
graphic novels that rely on the image and let the image do the work, right? And not try to explain.
Almost
Yeah.
there's like.
No, I love that, and I love, I might wanna steal the idea of.
Oh, look at with the-
Creating a space inside a space. I was thinking of how you did that a couple times, you've got a big background image and then
Yeah.
little